Chapter number 4, the April 2002 coup 47 hours that shook Venezuela. By early 2002, confrontation was no longer theoretical. Hugo Chávez had moved from rhetoric to action. He rewrote the constitution, consolidated executive power, replaced key military and oil industry leadership. Each move deepened divisions inside Venezuela and beyond it. The most critical battleground was oil. Venezuela's state oil company, PDVSA, had long operated with relative autonomy. Chávez saw it as a state within a state. In April 2002, he dismissed top executives live on television. The message was clear: control would be absolute. The response was explosive. Business leaders, labor unions, and opposition groups called for a mass protest in Caracas. What began as a demonstration became a march. And the march changed direction. On April 11, tens of thousands moved toward the presidential palace, Miraflores. The atmosphere was volatile. Pro-government supporters gathered nearby. Security forces were on edge. Then shots were fired. Chaos followed. Gunfire echoed through the streets. Protesters scattered. Television broadcasts cut abruptly. By nightfall, at least 19 people were dead. Responsibility remains disputed to this day. That night, military commanders withdrew support for the president. Chávez was detained. He refused to resign. Within hours, he was removed from power. A businessman named Pedro Carmona declared himself interim president. He dissolved the National Assembly, suspended the Constitution, dismissed the Supreme Court. In one stroke, Venezuela's democratic framework vanished. International reactions came quickly. The United States acknowledged the new government. Publicly, Washington framed the events as a response to chaos. Privately, questions lingered. But the coup had underestimated one force: the streets. In poor neighborhoods across Caracas, word spread. Chávez had not resigned. He had been taken. Spontaneous protests erupted. Tens of thousands marched this time in support of the ousted president. Military units began to fracture. Orders were questioned. By April 13, the coup unraveled. Loyalist forces reclaimed Miraflores Palace. Carmona fled. The interim government collapsed. 47 hours after his removal, Hugo Chávez returned to power. Televised, victorious, defiant. The failed coup changed everything. Chávez emerged stronger. The opposition was discredited. Trust between Venezuela and the United States collapsed. Chávez accused Washington of supporting the coup. The U.S. denied direct involvement, but the damage was irreversible. From that moment forward, Chávez no longer sought reform within the system. He pursued confrontation. The Bolivarian Revolution hardened. Anti-Americanism became central to state ideology. The lesson for Chávez was clear. Power had to be centralized. Dissent had to be controlled. And loyalty, especially within the military, had to be absolute. The coup had failed, but it planted seeds of paranoia, of polarization, and of a new kind of governance. Chapter number 5, Venezuela's geopolitical alliances. Russia, China, Iran, Cuba. As relations with the United States deteriorated, Venezuela made a strategic decision. It would not retreat, it would realign. Hugo Chávez believed isolation was a weapon used by powerful states. His response was to build an alternative network. A coalition not defined by ideology alone, but by opposition to U.S. dominance. The first and most symbolic alliance was with Cuba. An oil for services agreement was established. Venezuela supplied heavily discounted petroleum. Cuba sent doctors, teachers, and intelligence advisors. What began as cooperation evolved into dependency on both sides. Cuba became a political mentor. It offered experience in surviving U.S. pressure. Venezuela offered resources. Together, they framed their partnership as revolutionary solidarity. Beyond the Caribbean, Chávez looked east. To Russia, Russia saw opportunity. Arms sales increased. Military cooperation expanded. Joint exercises sent clear signals. Venezuela became Moscow's most vocal ally in the Western Hemisphere. A geopolitical message was being delivered. China represented something different, not ideology, capital. Beijing offered massive loans backed by oil. Infrastructure projects followed. Technology transfers were promised. Venezuela received financing without political conditions. But the debt was real. and repayment was guaranteed. By the late 2000s, Venezuela was sending oil directly to China to service loans. Sovereignty was preserved in rhetoric. Dependence shifted in practice. Then there was Iran, an alliance that alarmed Washington. Chávez and Iran's leadership bonded over shared opposition to US sanctions. Agreements were signed across energy, housing, banking, and manufacturing. Many projects failed, but the symbolism mattered. Venezuela was positioning itself as part of a global resistance bloc. These alliances reshaped Venezuela's foreign policy. The country no longer sought neutrality. It embraced confrontation. For the United States, the message was unmistakable. Venezuela was no longer a regional issue. It was a geopolitical problem. At home, these alliances were presented as victories, proof that Venezuela could survive without Washington, that a multipolar world was emerging. But behind the rhetoric, vulnerabilities grew. Oil production declined. Mismanagement deepened. Corruption expanded. New partners did not replace lost efficiency. The alliances provided political cover, but not economic stability. By the time Chávez's health began to fail, Venezuela was deeply entangled. With new creditors, new military partners, and fewer options, the strategy had succeeded in one way. Venezuela was no longer under US influence. But it was not independent.